the wildest lawsuits that led to massive payouts. At this point in internet history, I think we've all heard at least one story about someone suing a major corporation and walking away with millions of dollars. And while these stories are fascinating, usually if you've heard one, you've heard them all. Most of the time, these cases are pretty straightforward and involve obvious negligence or clear-cut wrongdoing. Fortunately, this video is different. Here, we're diving into lawsuits so strange and unbelievable that they feel like satire, yet they're real. We're going to cover lawsuits that are so absurd and so bizarre that even the most seasoned legal experts probably haven't heard of them. Oh yeah, and this list gets crazier as it goes on. Let's begin. The McDonald's coffee case that everyone gets wrong. If you thought you knew everything about the infamous McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit, then you would be partially correct. But this isn't just the regular story that everyone knows. This video is about lawsuits you've never heard the full truth about, and this case is way more insane than what most people understand. In fact, I think a good name for this would be the lawsuit that changed everything. But in case you're unfamiliar with what most people think happened, let me recap quickly. You see, most people think some lady spilled coffee on herself and sued McDonald's for millions because the coffee was hot. And even at that, the bar is so low for frivolous lawsuits that people assume this was just another money grab. But the McDonald's coffee case isn't what people think it is. This lawsuit was actually completely justified, and honestly, McDonald's was serving what could only be described as near-boiling liquid fire. For starters, the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health states that McDonald's coffee was being served at temperatures between 180 and 190 degrees Fahrenheit. And in this case, hotter is definitely not better. The woman who sued, Stella Liebeck, suffered third-degree burns over 6% of her body and was hospitalized for 8 days. She required skin grafts and extensive medical treatment. According to medical experts, coffee at those temperatures can cause third-degree burns in just 2 to 7 seconds of contact with skin. If anyone still believes McDonald's was blameless here, the trial evidence paints a very different story. McDonald's had received over 700 complaints about burns from their coffee in the previous decade, yet they continued to serve it at dangerous temperatures. The temperature McDonald's was using was significantly higher than other restaurants and what people typically brew at home. Home-brewed coffee is usually around 135 to 140 degrees, while McDonald's was serving theirs at nearly 190 degrees. That's hot enough to cause severe burns almost instantly. What makes this even more disturbing is that McDonald's knew their coffee was causing injuries, but they continued serving it at those temperatures because it stayed fresher longer and had a stronger aroma. Essentially, they were prioritizing convenience and cost savings over customer safety. So what actually happened during this infamous incident? Well, Stella Liebeck was sitting in the passenger seat of her nephew's car when she tried to add cream and sugar to her coffee. The cup tipped over, spilling the scalding liquid onto her lap. Within seconds, she was screaming in agony as the coffee burned through her sweatpants and caused severe injuries to her thighs, buttocks, and groin area. The burns were so severe that some areas required skin grafts, and she lost 20% of her body weight during her recovery. Initially, Liebeck only wanted McDonald's to cover her medical expenses, which totaled around $20,000. She wasn't looking for a massive payday or trying to get rich quick. McDonald's response was to offer her $800, which was basically insulting considering the severity of her injuries and medical bills. This led to the lawsuit that would eventually result in a jury awarding her $2.9 million in punitive damages. But here's the thing that most people don't know about this case. The jury didn't just randomly decide on that amount. They specifically chose an amount equal to 2 days of McDonald's coffee sales revenue, which was approximately $1.35 million per day. The jury wanted to send a message that would actually impact McDonald's bottom line and force them to change their dangerous practices. However, the judge later reduced the punitive damages to $480,000, and the case was eventually settled for an undisclosed amount that was likely even less. The woman who sued McDonald's for serving dangerous coffee became the poster child for frivolous lawsuits. But the reality is that McDonald's was serving coffee hot enough to cause third-degree burns in seconds. They knew it was dangerous, they had hundreds of complaints, and they chose profit over safety. This wasn't a case of someone trying to get rich quick off a minor accident. This was a case of a corporation putting customers at serious risk to save money and improve their product's shelf life. What makes this case even more interesting is how it completely changed the way companies handle product safety and how they communicate with customers about potential dangers. After this lawsuit, you started seeing warning labels everywhere, and companies became much more careful about obvious safety hazards. The McDonald's coffee case essentially created the modern landscape of corporate liability and consumer protection that we see today. And yes, that impact is still visible everywhere. The case of the woman who sued herself and won. Now, this might sound like something straight out of a comedy sketch, but I promise you this actually happened. In 1995, a woman named Barbara Bagley was driving her car when she rear-ended another vehicle. Pretty standard fender bender, right? Not even close. What makes this case absolutely insane is that Barbara Bagley was driving a company car, and the person she hit was also Barbara Bagley driving her personal vehicle. Let me explain this madness. Bagley worked for a company that required her to drive their vehicle for business purposes. On this particular day, she was driving the company car to a work appointment when she accidentally crashed into her own personal car that was parked on the street. The impact caused damage to both vehicles and resulted in Bagley injuring herself in the collision. Here's where things get legally bizarre. Bagley's personal insurance company told her that since she was driving a company vehicle at the time of the accident, her employer's insurance should cover the damages to her personal car and her medical expenses. But the company's insurance argued the opposite. They claimed that since Bagley was the owner of the personal vehicle that got hit, she should file a claim with her own insurance company. This created a legal nightmare where both insurance companies were pointing fingers at each other, and Bagley was stuck in the middle with mounting medical bills and repair costs. So what did she do? She literally sued herself. Bagley filed a lawsuit where she was simultaneously the plaintiff and the defendant. In legal documents, it was listed as Barbara Bagley versus Barbara Bagley. She was essentially arguing that Barbara Bagley, the employee, was negligent and caused damages to Barbara Bagley, the private citizen. The case went to court, and incredibly, she won. The judge ruled that the company's insurance was responsible for covering the damages because Bagley was acting in her capacity as an employee when the accident occurred. The payout wasn't massive by today's standards, but it set a legal precedent for cases involving employees who damaged their own property while working. What makes this case even more surreal is that during the trial, Bagley had to testify both as the victim and as the person responsible for the accident. She literally had to argue against herself while simultaneously defending her own actions. The exploding toilet lawsuit that changed plumbing forever. In 1996, a man named Kenneth Klein was using the bathroom at his workplace when something happened that sounds like it came straight out of a cartoon. The toilet he was sitting on literally exploded beneath him. But this wasn't some kind of prank or freak accident. The toilet exploded because of a manufacturing defect that caused pressure to build up in the plumbing system until the porcelain couldn't handle it anymore. Klein suffered severe injuries to his back, legs, and buttocks from the exploding porcelain. He required multiple surgeries and months of physical therapy. The explosion was so violent that pieces of the toilet were embedded in the bathroom walls, and Klein was found unconscious on the floor by his coworkers. When he sued the toilet manufacturer, the company initially tried to argue that the explosion was caused by user error or tampering. The evidence, and engineering analysis, proved otherwise. All in all, I'd wager that even the most hardcore legal nerds out there haven't heard of at least one of the cases I mentioned on this list. But if not, don't worry, because the legal system is full of bizarre situations just waiting to be discovered. To summarize some key takeaways, sometimes the most ridiculous-sounding lawsuits are actually completely justified. People can literally sue themselves and win, and never underestimate the explosive potential of defective plumbing. If you enjoyed this breakdown, you'll love my next episode on the most expensive court settlements ever recorded.